Hi everyone, my name is Njenga Hakina. I am the Africa Climate Editor at the China Global South Project. Just before we get to today's podcast, I want to update you on the work we are doing at CGSP. While there is extensive news coverage on China's relations with the United States, Europe, and the current situation involving Taiwan, the same cannot be said for its interactions with developing countries, also referred to as the Global South. Unfortunately, there is a lack of comprehensive reporting in this area, and this is precisely where our team comes in. We have a dedicated group of editors who are in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and who diligently report on these stories in real time every day. Furthermore, we make it a point to provide our content in 3 languages. We have it in English, in French, and in Arabic. If you'd like to join our growing community of readers from around the world, go to ChinaGlobalSouth/subscribe. And subscriptions start at just $19 a month. Once again, that's ChinaGlobalSouth.com/subscribe. Thank you.
The China in Africa podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Africa-China Reporting Project at Wits University in Johannesburg. The ACRP promotes balanced, considered reporting on China-Africa relations through training programs held throughout the year. More information at africachinareporting.com.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast, a proud member of the Sinica Podcast Network. I'm Eric Olander, and as always, I'm joined by China Global South Managing Editor Cobus van Staden in Johannesburg and our Francophone Africa Editor Geraud Neema joining us from the beautiful island of Mauritius. A very good afternoon to both of you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Guys, today is a very big day for everybody here at the China Global South Project, but especially for our good friend Geraud, who has spent really the better part of the past 9 months working on just an incredible project to do something that's never been done before and map the entire copper and cobalt supply chain in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Last fall, when we embarked on this project, we really had no idea what we were going to get out of it. We just knew that this is something that needed to be done. We don't have this kind of data as to who are the actors, to the precise extent of what they're doing in each of the mines, what they're doing in terms of copper versus cobalt, and then also where does the cobalt and copper go after it leaves the country. And so here in Washington and many other capitals around the world, they are struggling to figure out how to manage their supply chains for minerals like cobalt, coltan, tantalum, and all these other metals and minerals that go into electric vehicle batteries, electronics, defense technologies. And there's concern in these capitals, too, about the role of the Chinese. But in many cases, they were flying blind in terms of the data. That is no longer the case. So, Geraud, a huge congratulations to you and the team that you put together to build this amazing tool. You've worked incredibly hard. If everybody wants to see what it is, you can go to ChinaGlobalSouth.com/Cobalt. There you're going to see a very long, extensive user guide. And the reason why we put this user guide up front and not the data right away is because we really want you to understand how Geraud and his team came about putting together all of the different inputs that made up this interactive chart. It's absolutely beautiful. Geraud, let's just have you do a quick little introduction as to what the tool is and what you hope to accomplish with it.
Thank you, Eric. So basically with this tool, what we've done, we've gathered a team of researchers who worked in the DRC to gather data on the ground about mining project, industrial mining project, as well as artisanal site. And we also gathered data from different mining industries in the DRC. We went to them, we asked them the data they had about exports and import of copper and cobalt in DRC, the different players, and we aggregated all of them and reproduced this tool. So with this tool, the user will be able to know who are the main exporters and players of cobalt and copper in DRC in 2022 and also in the past years. They'll also be able to know where the cobalt is going, who are the buyers, how much quantity those buyers they've bought from different exporters, and they'll be able to know the shares of in percentage of like what country represent how much in terms of import of Congolese cobalt and copper. So those are the kind of data that the user will be able to see and to find in the map. We also be able to see on the interactive map to see the scale of the Chinese mining mining in DRC, because we've put them in different colors. So you're going to see the Chinese in red, the Indians project, and the Kazakh, and different kind of projects. They're going to be able to see, even visually, to see how many Chinese projects there is in DRC. So yeah, those are the kind of data they'll be able to see in the tools that we've put in place.
So a lot of the data comes from the Congo Ministry of Mines. So this is official data. Much of it goes back 5 years, so there is some historical perspective there. Before we get into what the findings are, could you do me a favor and let's define a couple of terms here, because I'm not entirely sure that everybody understands the difference. You mentioned artisanal mining. Can you explain the difference between artisanal mining and industrial mining, and then roughly what the proportions are? Because I think that's a really important scene setter for us.
So basically, the artisanal minings are the ones that's where you have no mechanics, no machinery, no industrial projects. It's basically cobalt and copper, that's man-made mined cobalt and copper. That's where you find a lot of people from different communities working on the artisanal site. So industrial...
And that's where the child miners are.
And Geraud, when people talk about the dangers of children being involved in cobalt mining, this is the part of the cobalt mining operation they're talking about, right?
Exactly. This is the part of the cobalt operation that they are talking about, because in those places, this is where you see families coming with the children, with the parents, because this is the place where they can easily get money, and they sell those production either to different industrial projects or they sell it to other players in the supply chain. So yeah, this is the part where we have that debate.
And roughly how much of the output is artisanal and how much is industrial?
So roughly speaking, we're going to be talking between 15 to 20%. That is the share of the artisanal output in the DRC in terms of copper and cobalt. The big bulk of it is really more industrial, because let's face it, cobalt and copper are very cost and heavy minerals to mine. So you really need a lot of money. So that's why the bulk of them is more industrial project. This is even where the bulk of the Congolese copper and cobalt output comes from, industrial project than artisanal mining sites.
So, Geraud, like looking at the data, who would you say are the biggest players in the Congolese cobalt sector?
So interestingly speaking, I'm going to take two approaches. You have like individually speaking and collectively speaking. Let's start by collectively speaking. Collectively speaking, in terms of the numbers, the Chinese are the biggest players, because you have many Chinese mine in the DRC, industrial Chinese mine. Those are the big players industrially. Individually speaking, it's going to be the Swedes with the Glencore project. Glencore projects are among the top 3 over the last 5 years in terms of cobalt and copper output. So this is where now you see the kind of difference when we see in terms of output. The Chinese are only getting bigger because they really have a lot of projects. And let's face it, in terms of big projects, one of the big Chinese projects, the TFM, is in terms of size, is the largest, even comparing to Glencore, comparing to other Kazakh project. The Chinese TFM project is the largest one. But in terms of output, Glencore projects are the main players.
Okay, so let's just unpack that a little bit, because I think this is a really important concept here. So what you're saying is that if you look at individual companies, Glencore's output exceeds that of anybody. And I think that's going to come as a surprise to a lot of people, because the narrative around the world is that the Chinese are by far the dominant players. But what you're saying is that if you add up all of the Chinese mines together, all the small ones, the middle-sized ones, and then the mega ones like TFM, by the way, is the Tenke-Fungurume mine, and that is the world's largest copper and cobalt mine. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's about 12% of the world's total output. 12-13% of all the cobalt in the world comes from this one mine, correct?
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so that's the summary of it. So let's just kind of dive into this TFM thing, because this has been in the news quite a bit over the past year. A lot of people may have been hearing about it and following it. TFM was originally, or previously, owned by an American company, Freeport-McMoRan. They sold it to CMOC, a Chinese company, but then they ran into this problem with the Congolese over the contracts. Without getting into too much detail, give us just a little bit of detail on that so people have an understanding of why TFM is so important today.
So basically, as we've covered this story extensively for the past month, TFM was in a dispute with its partner Gécamines over the contract on the Tenke-Fungome mining. Gécamines was basically like using CIMOC to underreporting the real reserve they were exploiting in TFM. That's led to a dispute for all 2021 and 2022, even impacting, when you see the numbers, impacting TFM output last year.
And this week, they've actually announced that they've restarted the shipments, right?
Exactly. This week, Monday, they've announced that they've resumed the export of copper and cobalt and, making it the point that the dispute with Gécamines is over. Although we still have to know if that final agreement was signed, because so far, Gécamines hasn't made any comments about how the deal happened and what was the clause of the final contract they signed.
And just for those of you who are not familiar with the Gécamines is the Congo state-owned mining company, and they are involved in not only cobalt, but copper, coltan, all sorts of mining operations, but they are the state-owned mining entity in the DRC that has joint ventures in many cases with a lot of the Chinese entities out there. Now, the price of cobalt is down, I think the number is 65% compared to last year. So the release of the cobalt from the TFF mine now back onto the market is not going to help the price at all. And this is bad news for the Canadians and for the Americans, because those are private industries and private companies. And so they may hesitate to get into the Congolese cobalt mining sector given the low price of cobalt. So that's a very interesting, just a little side note there to kind of set this all back against, the backdrop of where we are today. Let's go back to the data, go back to the map. One of the other aspects of your map is also, where does the cobalt go after it leaves the Congo? What did the data tell you?
So the data is telling us the cobalt, the main destination, as everybody can expect, was China, of course. We see a lot of cobalt and copper from the DRC goes to China. And we also see different new destinations coming up on the map. We see Singapore coming on the map. We see Vietnam coming on the map. We see United Emirates Arabic coming on the map as well. And we see in the destination, it's where you see the kind of entanglement between different players in the supply chain, where you see Western companies buying from Chinese companies in the DRC and shipping it to Singapore, where you see, for example, Samsung buying copper and cobalt from different Chinese companies in the DRC and shipping them to Singapore. And you see those kind of dynamic. And the biggest players of sales is China. And we also see some African players coming into the destination. And this is where I would like to tell the user that those African countries are likely to be transit countries, because those exporting companies, some of them have listed those countries as final destination. It's only when you look at who are the buyers that you realize that they are only transit country, because the list among the biggest buyers in those destinations, you have Access World, who was until January 2023, it was Glencore subsidiaries. It was these big commodities traders that now it's been sold to another company. So yeah, this is just tells you that that's where you're going to see South Africa, Mozambique and Tanzania coming up on the map, but they're really just transit country.
And Geraud, at the moment, by far, the vast bulk of the cobalt refining is happening in China, right? Do you see any other refiners coming on the map at the moment?
So on the map at the moment, China is basically the main destination where refining is happening. Although we can see different buyers sending to different destinations, but based on the quality of cobalt they're exporting there, and based on the fact that those countries, they do not refine cobalt. So China remains the main destination when it comes to refineries of cobalt.
And some news on that front, that Zimbabwe in the past 2 or 3 weeks has just unveiled 2 refining plants for lithium. So there is some movement now in Africa to try and move up the value chain and do more refining. However, those of you who listened to our show with our Southeast Asia correspondent, Antonia Timmerman in Jakarta, we talked about the refining of nickel, that Chinese refiners have come into the market and captured a lot of the value there. So refining is really a key part of this equation. There's been a dream in the Congo for a long time, and President Felix Tshisekedi, as well as Finance Minister Nicolas Kazadi, have been talking about adding a refining capacity in the DRC. Companies from China, like the battery maker CATL, have been in the DRC talking with stakeholders there about building a refining capacity. Do you see that happening anytime soon in the Congo?
So yeah, before getting into that question about the Congo, let me just get back a bit on Zimbabwe, because our listeners might think that Zimbabwe is like now refining lithium at a very high stage. So basically what's happening in Zimbabwe now, it's now Zimbabwe is producing lithium concentrates, or what you call spodumene. So basically, just to keep in mind, the very first stage of processing, and the rest of it still goes to China in terms of deep refining to produce the very last stage of lithium product. So in DRC, we see the same trend happening, and that's why we see it in terms of the quality of cobalt that's coming out of the DRC. You can see hydroxide cobalt, so where you see a certain level of refining happening in cobalt, just like Zimbabwe for lithium. It's a very early stage of refinery of cobalt, but the bulk of like the deep refinement of cobalt still happen in China. And they try to do something, but the electricity supply deficit and all those kind of know-how deficits into the DRC makes the process a bit longer and complex.
That's the problem everybody talks about over and over again, Cobus, is this lack of power infrastructure. This is a problem even in South Africa, the most advanced economy in the southern African region. So in a place like the DRC, moving up that value chain is going to be really dependent on infrastructure development.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been revealing that over the last week or two, there's been all of these reports of Development Finance Corporation, the US government-linked Development Finance Corporation, making investments or possible investments in the Lobito logistics corridor from linking the DRC border with a port in Angola. And it is revealing that despite having signed, an MOU with the DRC and Zambia a while ago to move towards refining, that logistics line will actually just export raw ore, as far as I understand. So, it's revealing kind of like indication of how difficult it is to get that happening in Africa.
That DFC money that's coming in is part of the PGII, what we've been talking about for a long time, and it's starting to happen now. I guess the key question that I have for both of you, and I don't know if you guys have the answer either, is the idea of why is the U.S. helping to build a railway through Angola for raw materials that will eventually go to China for processing? That's the part that I still haven't gotten my head around.
Exactly. That's something for myself I'm kind of questioning, because, for instance, what they are telling us is like last year and over the past 2 years, the only company that sent a very tiny portion of its export of cobalt and copper to Angola was a Glencore project, except that the bulk of them sent them to Durban, to Beira, to Dar es Salaam. So, and when you know that in Europe and in the US, they don't process cobalt, you kind of wonder, why are you going to build a railway and to kind of open that corridor, knowing that the bulk of copper and cobalt coming out of the DRC and Zambia are still in need of processing, which tells you that it might end up to China for processing before going back to Europe and the US, unless the processing, really the deep, high level of processing start to happen in DRC and Zambia, which is so far unlikely to happen in the very short term.
So, Geraud, all of this is happening against this increasing drumbeat in Washington, in Europe, and in Japan to try and kind of de-risk their supply lines from Chinese influence, and particularly to get supplies of cobalt that don't go through China. So having now looked at this entire landscape in so much detail, how optimistic are you that that is actually possible?
I'd say not optimistic. I'm just being realistic that it's really it's going to be difficult to happen. Let me just give you a case when it comes to copper. Trafigura, which is a Swiss commodities trader, bought copper from a bunch of Chinese companies in the DRC, most of them Chinese companies in the DRC, and they shipped them to Singapore. Same thing with Samsung, and same thing with different Swiss commodities traders who bought from Chinese company and shipped them to Hong Kong or to China. So when you see the level of entanglement of different players, of different stakeholders in that supply chain, you're gonna see that it's quite difficult, because many are not familiar, they're still not following. But January this year, Glencore sold its subsidiary Access World to a private-owned corporation. So that private-owned corporation, we kind of have difficulty to localize where it is. Some rumors are talking about that being Chinese-owned or different East Asian-owned kind of corporation. But that tells you that, the bulk of, copper and cobalt that's going to both from Access World are still going to be sent to China or to a different part of Asia. So it's very kind of difficult to see that to happen.
So, Geraud, this is absolutely fascinating. It's an insight into a world that, again, we have never seen before, mapped out in data. And I think this tool is going to be so important for policymakers in the US, in China, in Europe. But the real focus of this should be in the Congo itself. And this is something that I think is too often overlooked in the discussion because, yes, the Congo is in the middle of a great power competition. It's got resources that everybody wants. But that's not a new story for the Congo. It's been at the center of resource battles for centuries. So the key question now is, what does Congo want to do with this resource? Can it better manage this resource? Can your data help decision makers there have a discussion about what's best for the country and how more of the value of what's in the ground can actually be used to benefit the Congolese people? Now, I know you're a pretty cynical guy when it comes to Congolese politics, but is that delusional given the current state of politics in the DRC? Or is there a pathway for some of the estimated $24 trillion worth of resources that are in the ground today in the DRC to be used to better the people of the DRC?
I'd like to be optimistic, but the reality is, when you look at just Congolese politics right now, when you look how messy it is, how politics is really getting bad over the years, and when you look all the debates and the controversy around different mining deals that's kept on being signed right now, you kind of have the realistic mindset to say, we don't really see that happening anytime soon. And even when you see the US trying to push how to remove China, and I've read that they're about to discuss a bill about how to remove China from the DRC and everything, all those debates. When you look at all of that, you take the context of the political situation in the DRC, you just realize that the condition for a very good, efficient, and transparent governance that's going to lead to a much better management of natural resources are just not there. And when you try to push for that debate, many people, even in the West, are not really willing to listen to that debate, because I bet you, from people who are listening to me from Washington, they'd be like, we are willing to deal with maybe a corrupt power in Kinshasa who's favored to the United States than dealing with the more transparent government who's favored to China. So when you look at all those contexts, you realize that even outside, the condition for a good governance in DRC that's going to better the management of natural resources are just not met. And that's the sad part of it.
So all of this development is happening against the background of a race between these different countries to also try and kind of cut cobalt out of their supply chains completely, to try and develop post-cobalt batteries, and even, kind of trying to eliminate other kind of rare minerals from batteries too. So looking into the future, how do you see that race affecting the DRC in the longer term?
Right now, the DRC is kind of trying to catch up to that race in a way that they're anticipating that the cobalt is going to move away quite fast. So that's why you had now discussion about prospection of nickel, where the DRC Mining Ministry reached out to CIMOC again, asking for them to try to do nickel exploration in DRC, because we are hoping to have some nickel reserve in the DRC. That's why they're also trying to push for lithium in the DRC. But beyond that, you really don't see a strategy that's kind of anticipating the post-cobalt, the post-nickel, and the post-lithium. You really don't see that. You still have that strategy of like, the more resources that we have, the more it's going to be good for us, and we are trying to remain relevant in that debate. They do not really anticipate that what are we going to do if technology moves so fast to the point that those resources are really, really not like the way we need them now. But so far, they're kind of happy about the fact that when you look different prospection, they're telling you that, nickel demand is going to increase by the next 20 years, lithium demand is going to increase, only cobalt is going to decrease a bit, but those two they're going to increase. So that's where the DRC is kind of hoping to cling on and hoping to remain relevant in that debate.
Okay, so once again, the map and all of the data and the fantastic work that Geraud and his team did can be found at chinaglobalsouth.com/cobalt. And it is just stunning. It really is stunning. I am just so proud of what you guys have done. This is groundbreaking. It's pioneering. It's going to be very, very useful for policymakers. Some of the key themes that Geraud talked about is that the fantasy in the United States, Japan, and Europe of separating China from the cobalt supply chain, not going to happen. And the data tells us this, impossible. Also, the map shows a much more fragmented, complex landscape in the copper and cobalt mining sector, and also where the cobalt goes is fascinating. All of that is revealed in this map. Couple things that are coming up. We're going to be launching a French version of this next week. And then Geraud is going to be spending the month of August in the media in the DRC, talking about the findings of this, again, to spark a conversation among Congolese about the data and also about the findings. What do you think, very quickly before we go, what do you think those conversations in the Congo are going to go like?
Those conversations are going to be I think there are going to be a lot of debate around that, a lot of questions. People are going now to see the magnitude of different players and the influence they do have. A lot of criticism as well, because people are going to understand why the DRC. Because when you see, for instance, the flux of money between Cobalt and copper that happened over the years, people are going to wonder how much we didn't take advantage of those money influx. So yes, the debates are going to be fierce and difficult, but I'm kind of sad in a certain way because I'm anticipating that the political debate right now, the election, are going to overcrowd different debates that we could bring on the table.
There's a presidential election at the end of the year, and those politics, like the politics elsewhere where presidencies are being determined in the next year, specifically here in the United States, do have a tendency of overwhelming everything. Well, Geraud, thank you so much for the hard work. If people want to find you and the work you're doing at Projet Afrique Chine, our French language service, where can they find you guys?
They can find me on projetafriquechine.com, on Twitter, Afrique Chine, Afrique with a K, and on my personal Twitter account, Christian Geraud. There you're going to find me. And I'm going to be sharing soon the insight of the data that we have produced, and people can now access them on our China Global South project.
Geraud's done this in 2 languages, and he said that, well, it's important that the English one gets out. He's super excited about the French one because that's the one that's close to his heart. And also, Geraud produces a weekly newsletter twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. It's in French, so if you are Francophone, you want to sign up for that, it's absolutely free. Just go to the Projet Afrique Chine website. By the way, the links to that are all in the show notes. Enter your email, and you'll hear directly from Geraud. Cobus and I will be back again next week with episodes of both the China Global South podcast and another edition of the China Africa podcast. Again, you can subscribe to these in all your favorite places to get podcasts, or you can just go to our website at ChinaGlobalSouth.com. We've got them all there. You will find all of the data, our new chat CGSP tool, the Congo project. Everything is at ChinaGlobalSouth.com. Some of it is available for free. Others is available only for subscribers. If you would like to join our growing community of readers around the world and support the independent work and the independent journalism that Geraud and Cobus and the entire CGSP team are doing, we would really appreciate your support. Go to ChinaGlobalSouth.com/subscribe. We'll let you try it out free for 30 days. See if you like it. If you don't like it, don't worry about it. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you want to reach out to any of us, it's really easy. You can reach me, Eric, at ChinaGlobalSouth.com, Geraud, CG Neema at ChinaGlobalSouth.com, and then Cobus at ChinaGlobalSouth.com. So that'll do it for this week's edition. We'll all be back again next week with another episode. Until then, thank you so much for listening.
The discussion continues online. Tag us on Twitter at ChinaGS Project and visit us at ChinaGlobalSouth.com. If you speak French, check out our full coverage at projetafriquechine.com and Afrique Chine on Twitter. That's Afrique with a K. And you'll also find links to our sites and social media channels in Arabic.